everybody. Welcome. This is Shaker Museum and our program, Shaker Ethos and Gardens. I'm Lacey Schutz. I'm the executive director of the museum. We are located in Old Chatham, New York, and are generally considered to have one of the most comprehensive collections of Shaker material culture and archives in the world. The museum was founded in 1950 and operated in Old Chatham for several decades, closed to the public in 2009, and we've been searching for a new home for the museum for some time now. And about 2 years ago, we started looking at a building in Chatham, New York, which is very close by to Old Chatham. We started exploring whether that building would be feasible. It's a 19th century masonry building that had several purposes over the years. It was a hotel, it was a car dealership, it was an industrial knitting factory. And we decided to go forward with it. And at the beginning of 2020, we hired Annabelle Seldorf and Seldorf Architects to design the sort of intervention into the historic building, as well as a modern addition onto it. And we purchased the building at that time as well. So through Seldorf, we were able to begin working with Nelson Byrd Waltz, landscape architects, which is a very exciting thing for us. Nelson Byrd Waltz has practiced in over 25 states and 10 countries, and has garnered over 100 awards within the past 15 years, including the prestigious Amanda Burden Public Open Space Award for City Garden in St. Louis. The work of the firm has been featured in numerous national and international publications and is the subject of a monograph published by Princeton Architectural Press. Some of their recent projects include the Rothko Chapel in Houston and the Peabody Essex Museum Garden in Salem, Massachusetts. And I'm joined tonight by Mark Streeter. Mark joined the Nelson Byrd Waltz New York office in 2011. He received his Master of Landscape Architecture degree from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in 2001. He too has received numerous awards. Mark has contributed to and managed projects across the United States and abroad, including our neighbors over at the Ilana State Historic Site and for the Hudson Yards East project. He also has a home in Columbia County, and we're delighted to have him as part of our team. So last summer, he presented for the first time his concept for the green space around Shaker Museum's new home in Chatham. And I was so fascinated by the research that he'd done into Shaker horticulture and agricultural practices, and the way that he drew inspiration from those things. And I'm really excited to take a deeper dive into that tonight with him. Mark has prepared a presentation. I'm going to turn things over to him. We're delighted to be here with you, Mark. For those of you who are joining in, there will be a time afterwards to ask questions, and we'll do that by typing into the chat box. So we'll look forward to having a little virtual conversation after Mark's presentation. So take it away, Mark.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lacey, and thank you all for joining and all of your support for the Shaker Museum. As we've been undertaking this journey, it's been made real how important these Shaker values and their beliefs and their ethos is, in addition to all of the wonderful design elements that we see. And so it's really important to have their stories told, and we're hoping that story can help to be told through the landscape at the museum. So today what I'm going to talk to you is about that process that we undertook. I'll tell you a little bit about our firm and some of the work that we've been doing with cultural landscapes in the region, and then how we are engaged now with the Shaker Museum. We'll also talk about the site. The site, as Lainey mentioned, is in Chatham, New York. It's not at the Mount Lebanon site. So looking at how we're looking at designing this space so that it is within the context of the community and the village, and also can represent the museum. And so then I'll also be talking about some of the research that we did into the horticulture, the practices, their beliefs, and then how we translated that into design for the museum. So embedding some of those narratives, embedding some of those ideals in this landscape so that that can be revealed. I'll be talking about some of the plant selections that we have. And then at the end, a short section on just some other ideas on how people have used shaker principles to create smaller gardens, similar to what we're doing, but almost in a more residential kitchen garden scale. So that's the presentation, and I'm going to just let's see. Oh, there we go. So to just give you a little background, I work for Nelson Byrd Waltz Landscape Architects. We have offices here in New York City, Charlottesville, and Houston. And we do a range of work. This is the monograph that Lacey had just mentioned. And it really covers kind of the range of work in our mission, which is to work within urban, existing urban environments in case of like the Hudson Yards or the Atlanta Beltway at the top. But also we work in many other aspects of parks, botanical gardens, large public parks, and community sculpture gardens. And also a big aspect of what we do is conservation agriculture. So looking at large tracts of land and setting that aside for conservation, but also making areas productive for sustainable agriculture for the future. So we like to say that our work kind of occurs at the intersection of culture and ecology. And in both of those senses, we do a lot of research in the sciences, in the ecology, to understand the land, and then that tells us how the land should be designed. Similarly, with cultural landscapes, we look at the culture of those landscapes, the history, and how can we take that research and embed that into meaningful designs that have narratives that people can understand. So what is a cultural landscape? Cultural landscapes express humans' relationships to the land. So these are the markings on the land that we can read and that we can understand tradition and history, from anything from spatial organization to small scale features to buildings and architectural styles to cultural traditions. All of these are marks on the land and also have stories embedded in them to tell stories about that culture. So there are kind of three cultural landscapes that in terms of preservation that I'd like to just kind of review. One is, I'm sorry, I'm missing my, so the idea of the preservation, which is preserving the past. And this is like an existing site where you preserve the buildings for the future. The other is a rehabilitation. So we're looking towards the future. How can we make this historic or cultural site work for the public and for the current society, contemporary societies? And then another is the idea of recreating history through design. So looking at design and pulling these elements, pulling design elements, pulling ideas, and then creating a design to create this cultural landscape. So for the museum, that's what we're really doing, is that this is a site that is located in a town. Well, let me just first, these are some of the cultural institutions that we've been working around in the region. And by working on these, we really got to understand the cultural and ecological history of this area. And that's also how we became engaged with Annabelle Seldorf in cultural landscapes such as the Frick. And so they had asked us to join them and working in the Shaker Museum, which is just wonderful and completely in line with our mission. So these are, we've been working at Ilana, which is a 280-acre site in Hudson, New York, which has a lot of historic integrity, similar to the Mount, which we're also doing a master plan. But these are both kind of rehabilitations. The Jay Heritage Center in Rye is a little bit more kind of what we're looking at in terms of the idea at the Shaker, where this landscape had been much manipulated and the history had been erased. But in these 3 gardens, we're recreating a history that will tell the story of these different families that had lived and occupied this space. And so similarly, when we're talking about the Shaker Museum, this is occurring in Chatham, New York. Chatham's in Columbia County. It's a wonderful village. And this is an image of it that you can see here. The site is in our foreground. You can see the prow of the site. And in the center is the town roundabout with the town center or town hall just off to the side. So really fitting in and working in the context of this community is something that's important. So there's a number of historic architecture, but also there's a lot of contemporary and infill. So mediating that while preserving architecture, but also not trying to recreate history and recreate architecture are some of the things that, if I can say that Seldorf Architects is working with in terms of the building. This is a view of the village. That town hall is here. The roundabout that you saw was here, and then this is the site that the museum will be located on. This current building here is the one that's existing that will remain. These other 2 will be removed and demolished. So also just to give you some more context of the site, this is looking from that circle and looking towards the existing building as it is now. This is a view from, this is Austerlitz Street that the building is fronted on. This is the front of the building and also the train tracks that run by here. And then the rear of the building with the existing buildings still there. The building has changed dramatically over time, and you can see that in this image on the upper left, it had a completely different architectural style from Second Empire with these colonnades around it, and the mansard roof to the auto sales with, you can see an addition of an elevator tower and a continuing evolution of the roof to the current condition with the gabled roof down in this lower portion and the extension. And then this is the proposed rendering that Seldorf has done. The building itself does not have any historic designation, so we don't have to comply to any historic periods of significance, but they are respecting the history of it. And in a way, by adding the gable, it's not trying to recreate, but it's tying in with some of the Shaker vocabulary and style. So again, this is looking at our site, and you can see from the 1870s to where we are now, how much the site has changed. So all the history and the culture of the site, a lot of that has been removed and erased. So what we are really looking at, and this is another view of the plan of the site, where you can see the circle, the roundabout, and these are all green area. These green areas are medians that the village has created some really nice plantings that we'd like to tie in with. And so one of the ways that we really want to tie into the fabric of the community is that we realized in this image down here in the sea, that there's a very narrow landscape, a very narrow prow. And we realized we could open that up and make a much larger statement of planting that could really tie in with the village, as well as serve as kind of a bookend to this important space in the village, and a foreground to the museum. The museum's providing at least 9 spaces along the road here, additional spaces here for parking, for those that you may be concerned and local to Chatham. And they also are providing additional 17 spots at the Pizza Den. So there's more parking along here than there was, and then there will be additional to accommodate any visitors to the museum. So that kind of gives you an idea of the site and what we're dealing with. And so the next step was to look into the history and the culture of the Shakers. And we did this through a process of, well, I first started talking out with Jerry Grant, who is head of collections, and many of you may know him. So Jerry was kind enough to write a summary of the Shakers, Mount Lebanon Shakers relationship to horticulture and the land. A lot of it is through texts and through quotations, because from the 1850s, anything before the 1850s wouldn't have any photo documentation. So we've gained it from different resources, and some of these, some of the insights that Jerry has given us. So I'm going to pepper you throughout with some quotes and some maxims and tenets throughout here that I just have fallen in love with. But a lot of these just also really give us clues to what the landscape looked like and how they maintained it and how they used it. So everything in the Shaker world, from brooms to villages, is laid out in rows, grids, tightly packaged and formatted. This is from a visitor from the New Yorker writing at the time. And the Shakers created an aesthetic style and order and simplicity that can be seen in their architecture, their landscape, and their craft. And even as in this image below, they developed precisely choreographed dances and orderly marches accompanied by symbolic gestures. For many people, the clean design, the high quality of materials, and careful workmanship evident in their furnishings and artifacts are just the most visible reminders of a much broader and deeper system of values and beliefs. The simple functional geometric boxes and rectangles that they have in their furniture, these are all functional, but they aren't necessarily symmetrical. Utilizing local materials, and just the incredible craftsmen, as you can see in some of the masonry walls, the weaving, the artifacts in the baskets. All of these are just a testament to how important and spiritual this work was to the Shakers. These are some of the elements that we've just gathered from the landscape of fences, thresholds. They would use these boardwalks at thresholds before you would enter buildings to stomp off the dirt. So those are kind of these elements that were somewhat traditional in the Shaker villages or families. Some more maxims to just give a sense of their aesthetics and their work. But don't make something unless it is both necessary and useful. But if it is both necessary and useful, don't hesitate to make it beautiful. Beauty rests on utility, hands to work, hearts to God. So ornamentation was not something that it was something that was not part of their aesthetic and also their religion. It was things were to be simple. These images here are gift drawings, and they're quite ornate, but these are not intended to be art. They are their spirit drawings, which are revelations that they receive from God or from dreams. And so they were never really regarded as art, but they were sacred revelations. And there are a series of Shaker Millennial Laws that were created that restricted the use of decoration. But through some of these spirit drawings, the Shakers revealed a delight in their ornamentation. And there's a tremendous amount of symbolism throughout these. So they had symbols of things that were common for them, like the idea of lamps and candles representing heavenly light, or the idea of white clocks representing death. So all of these had very symbolic meaning that are embedded in them. There are other geometric forms that had meaning to them, and one was this idea of concentric circles. The Shakers believed that there are 4 large cycles in human history, but then within these cycles there are infinite number of smaller cycles that existed within them. And so this form of the circle and these concentric circles was something that was sacred, that you can see in some of the gift spirit drawings, and even in their dancing, where they had these rhythmic dancing. And this is how they got the name Shakers, for their charismatic religious services. And then the round barn, which you can see up at Shaker, or at Hancock Village. The Millennial Laws that they created were these strict laws that ranged in dictating all aspects of their life, including aesthetics and design. So it even dictated colors. So colors, these primary colors, these bold colors, were something that were dictated, but no ornamentation. And this goes with more of the landscape and how they treated the exterior, but that all walks must be laid straight, fields laid out square, and fences built straight. So that gives you an idea of what this landscape was like. So the Shakers were passionately committed to improving human nature and building a model society. They strive for perfection that encompassed simplicity, harmony, order, usefulness, efficiency, and beauty. And they were celibate, and they practiced a communal utopian lifestyle, including pacificism. And there's definitely much more equality in the sexes between men and women, where both men and women had leadership roles in the families. And as being celibate, they were welcoming. The only way they had new members is to welcoming new people, orphans, other people from the country or from the community. So they're a very open and welcoming society, and we want these traits to be revealed in the landscape that we're designing for the museum. So now I'd like to talk about more of their relationship to the land and the Shakers in the land, because for the Shakers, gardening was a spiritual exercise. It was a way of putting belief into practice and taking responsibility for heaven on earth. And Shaker horticultural work came to us in several different forms. There were vegetable gardens, often called kitchen gardens, that supplied vegetables for the family table. There are seed gardens and families, such as the North family at Mount Lebanon, that raised garden seeds for sale and also supplied some food for the family and the family's livestock once the seeds were harvested. Orchards, berry patches, and vineyards supplied fruit and family for sale. And these are some images of the Mount Lebanon site. And finally, medicinal herbs were kept in some of the Shaker families that produced herb-based medicines for sale. These gardens were the work of a class of Shakers generally designated as gardeners. Farmers, on the other hand, were responsible for livestock and raising field and root crops, grains, grasses, potatoes, and consumed both by livestock and members of the family. And so these are some of the images of the Hancock village today, which would have much more of an ornamental, or has more ornamental. You can see in this quote, things were starting to change later, or as the 1900s came along, where they kind of let up a little bit on the ornamentation, but it still needed to be useful and beautiful. But one of the greatest contributions that the Shakers have made is their contribution to creating the idea of seeds and putting these seeds in little paper bags and distributing them around the country. So this was an incredible endeavor. It was incredibly profitable for them. And it grew over time, where they would have Shaker salesmen going out and meeting and selling seeds. And these are some of the ways that they would organize and categorize the seeds, and then go out and sell these seeds to the public. But the public at this time in America really didn't know how to garden. And so the Shakers came up with a Shaker's Garden Manual to help sell their seeds in a way. And this was done in the mid 1800s. And this lays out all sorts of ways of laying out garden in with the principles of the Shakers, from giving specifics on choosing a garden site to the recipe for compost, pairing raised beds, sowing seeds in rows and hills. This is great. They tell you they have a string that is laid out in each of these rows so that you can perfectly align your seeds in this row. And start at, it's too much. I just love it. And then, you know, even going into the transplanting, watering, and the care of these plants. And so all of this information that we've garnered from the religious beliefs, their values, to their agricultural practices and their marks on the land, these are things that we want to instill into the landscape at the Shaker Museum. So this is the proposed site and the building that you've seen before. This is the main building, and then this over here is a new addition that Seldorf is adding. The parcel of land is, as you saw before, is kind of that small triangle. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go through the design in different areas, enlarging that area and going through the thoughts behind those designs and some of the different plants. So this first area I'll be going over is this in the front of the building, this Austerlitz Street, River Street. And then I'll be talking about this community or communal gathering space. And finally, this entry garden and some of the back of the house function. So zooming into that area that I was just showing you, this is that prow with this new garden that will be also a focal piece for the village. And the idea is to really lay this out in very simple single species in rows to reflect that horticultural tradition of the Shakers and agriculture, but also to create low maintenance and hardy plants for the museum so that they can maintain it in the way that the Shakers would have maintained it. You know, this is a style of garden that would be pleasing and understandable to the Shakers. Some of these gardens that may be in trend today, like the Highline, or, you know, the wispy informal gardens with wonderful mixes of perennials and grasses. The Shakers, that would not have been, from what I can tell, that would not have been beautiful to them. They wouldn't have understood it. It wouldn't have had made sense, because there is no utility necessarily in it, although there is a lot of ecological utility in it. So you know, creating just these bands is something that's hearkening back to their aesthetic, but also their treatment of the land. There will be a lawn that will be manipulated, precisely graded into terraces, again, hearkening back to their agricultural history, which will create spaces for the community to gather. Also, we're creating an heirloom crabapple to reference their history of orchards and fruit production. And the front of the building, this is the front of the building. We're leaving it unadorned or with no foundation planting, so that it could be simple and unadorned like the Shakers typically do. So I'm going to show you now a view looking from here towards the main facade of the building. So this is a view that shows some of those gardens that I just mentioned, with the powerful, strong bands of plantings, the unadored front, the terraces. If you look off to the right here, you can see the new addition and the new entrance to the addition that you can see from the town. And in the front here is a small community or gathering space, which I'm going to focus in on in the next few slides. So this is zooming in. We were just talking about those terraces and the gardens off to the left. This is moving into the front of the building, with this is the main mass of the brick building. And so one of the things that was very important to the museum was to create a space not only for the museum, but but that is very welcoming and accessible to the community. This is something that the Shakers would have done, and this is something that's very important to the museum. So this is, even though it's accessible to the museum as a space that can be used for small gatherings, even starts of lectures, it's also very open to the town. So as you're coming from the village, you can easily come into this space, utilize the space, even come up into to access the building from from these stairs. There's an entry plaza, as we're calling it, which kind of is the termination of the village sidewalk. And then in the way that we've designed this, it opens up to spill and to draw you into the site. Again, trying to create a welcoming equity environment for people to be welcome to the site, and then creating a small garden, entry garden, with colorful bands of perennials, evergreen shrubs that are tied in with the perennial bands at the prow. This is a view looking at that entrance and the way that you can come in off the sidewalk into the site, this communal gathering area. And then another view of that space. It's with the circle, these concentric circles forming the design of the space, a wooden and metal bench that's off to the side, and then a very slightly sloped lawn with these stairs that are making up some existing grade, but we thought we'd utilize that as a kind of an informal amphitheater. This is another view coming into the site. So as we were talking about, coming off of the sidewalk, really drawing people into the entrance, and these really strong, powerful bands of plantings will welcome people with a display throughout the season. And another view of the entrance. This is showing the entrance to the museum, and then beyond that, there's a loggia. And you can see within the glass, and that's a communal space for cafe and the museum entrance. More just showing the accessible parking in the front, and everything is accessible in terms of accessibility to the front of the building. This would be something that the Shakers would appreciate, but this is kind of back of the house, but it's very functional and it's performative. So, and it's beautiful, I think. But the back of the site is the lowest point of the site. So here we are able to capture and collect and filter stormwater. So we're utilizing native shrubs to perform that function, and there's a stair tower which is needed for egress, which is being added, and it harkens or references back to one of those previous iterations of the life of this building that had an elevator here, and then this will be covered with a native creeping Virginia creeper that will cover this mesh enclosed space, and then other wetland species of ferns and sedges will be located around here. And then this is more of a service area, loading dock, and space for staff. So the planting design, which we've kind of gone over in general, I'll kind of talk to you about some of the selection of the plants that we chose and why we chose that. So the main ornamental plantings are here at the prow, and then also here at the main entrance to the garden. So the plant palette that we have that we've selected are looking at street trees utilizing the ginkgo biloba, which is a beautiful ancient tree. It may not be native now, but at some time it was native. And this is a fruitless variety, but also it will be rather slender and narrow, so it doesn't obstruct views, but it will also provide shade to the spaces. Amelanchier is a beautiful native small tree that has berries that have been used historically for jams, and it also provides a tremendous amount of habitat for wildlife. an heirloom crab referencing the tradition of orchards and fruit production, and then a range of native evergreen and deciduous tree shrubs to provide those ecological functions of water, water filtration in those storm waters, as well as screening, but also providing winter evergreen and also flowers in the spring. I believe this is being recorded, so this is a plant list of what we have, and I think if you could always come back and freeze frame this if folks are interested in understanding more about what the specific plants are. But these are some of the plants that we're looking at for those bold horticultural bands. So utilizing plants like the echinacea, which is a medicinal herb, but it's also extraordinarily beautiful, long-lasting, having that in bands with other native plants that bloom throughout the year, like the Amsonia. The alliums are wonderful. They're part of the onion family, so they tie in well with this whole idea of agriculture and the seed production that they had, but they provide incredible low maintenance flowers throughout the season, or staggered throughout the season. And then other medicinal herbs like catmint and geranium, and then utilizing native grasses for some of those wetland areas, but also as some of these bands, again, hearkening to the agricultural bands that they've used. And then for that more utilitarian side, where it's shady and wet, looking at hay-scented ferns, Christmas fern, and some of the grasses to be in those shady or wetter areas. Another thing that the Shakers would have approved of are the on-structure sedum planting, which is off to the right, and which is located here. In the new addition, this is a basement, but this is flush. So underneath this is occupiable space. So on top of that is a green roof, which we're planting with sedum. And that's doing a number of things. It's doing performative function in terms of it's collecting rainwater, it's filtering rainwater, it's reducing stormwater, but it's also providing insulation for the building. And it happens to be beautiful. So another great thing that the Shakers, I think, would have appreciated it. So, taking these ideas that we've learned through this history of the forms, the concentric circles, the incredible ingenuity that they've done with the seeds, and the rigor and precision and care that they've given to the maintenance of the horticulture. These ideas that we're trying to embed into the design of the museum. And some of these ideas, I think we can even look to home landscapes. So this is some ideas, again, from the Shaker's Garden Manual. There are some folks that have, and I thought I'd just include this to continue with some of the ideas that we talked about, but these might be ideas that other people can create Shaker gardens and remember these things. One of the things that I find that's so fascinating is how memory and meaning can be related to objects. And I think often or I'll give the example of seeing a photograph that you hadn't seen in years, and all of a sudden this wellspring of information comes back, and you remember people, facts, and all sorts of information. And that's why it's so important that these ideas and these narratives are embedded, so that these stories can be told and people can live the Shaker values and ideals in their everyday life, or be reminded of them. So these are some ideas that I've garnered from some other folks in books that have looked at how utilize, and you can find the Shaker's Garden Manual still on Amazon and other places, to look at it and utilize it as your principles, but incorporating different elements of the Shakers and how they utilize fencing or other agricultural elements. Again, just triggering that memory, and then laying it out. Everything had to be laid out in straight grids, and utilizing local materials. And so, you know, that order is something that was so strong in Shaker history. And then this is just an example of how a garden could be laid out, utilizing these ornamental but medicinal or useful medicinal herbs, vegetables, and forbs. So those are kind of some of the ideas that we've come up with for the Shaker Museum, and we really hope that this will create a lovely garden space, a lovely space that the Shaker Museum can have a long and happy life here. And hopefully some of these ideas can translate to some of your gardens as well. So thank you very much for being a part of this. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that may have come up.
Well, thanks, Mark. This was really fantastic and such a treat for me to revisit this and just get a little more in depth with all of your thinking behind it. And I think one of the great things about working with Mark and with Nelson Byrd Waltz is that they really understood the museum's desire and mission to have a space that was welcoming to the community, whether they come in, see the exhibitions, learn anything about the Shakers or not. That this is somewhere that can be a gathering space and a place for people to come together. So that's been a really wonderful thing about working with Mark. So I want to open it up and see if anybody has any questions. You can type them into the chat. As we're waiting for you to sort of gather your thoughts and your questions, I have a couple of questions. So I'll start, but I hope to see some from our participants as well. Now, Mark, I know you've had a home nearby in Ghent for a while, and so you were already familiar with this building prior to Shaker Museum purchasing it. And I'm curious. Sort of, you probably drove by it a bunch of times. You probably looked at it. You probably had, a lot of people had imagined what that space could be. So I'm curious, if you had ever imagined some use for that building and what it was, and also when you started to really think about what you would do with it. I mean, it's a really challenging plot of land. It's odd shaped, you know, it's not really, you know, there's nothing, everything's kind of askew. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this has been a sort of an eyesore for the town, for the village for a long time. And it really is something that as you come into the town and you end at that traffic circle, it forms an anchor of the village that's just been vacant. And yeah, I think a lot of people have been thinking of ideas. My partner's works with hotels, and I always thought, wow, that could be a great hotel site to reinvigorate, you know, things in Chatham, although the site's too small for that. But yeah, I think everyone had great hopes and ambitions, but I don't think I mean, this is such an incredible and appropriate use for this site, to have this cultural institution there. The site is wacky. It's you know, it slopes from you know, up here down to from the east to the west, and from the north to the south. And it's little bits and pieces. And so that's one of the things when we were looking at that, is like, how can we, you know, is there a way that we can kind of improve that? Is there any way that we can improve the functioning of that site and how it's working in the context? And that's when we started thinking like, oh, we can actually maybe, you know, enlarge this space and make it a better space for the community and for the museum, and make it more attractive. So that's how that front prow had kind of evolved. And then just working with Seldorf through ideas on where, you know, spaces should be, where the entrance is, things kind of fell into place. And what I'm kind of pleased about is just the way that it looks, and it's coming together. It's almost like a a beautiful composition, a contemporary composition in a way that really sings with the landscape and the building and also the context of the site or the village.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Jeff Bailey asking about how we're going to provide irrigation to the plantings, especially in the sunny areas.
Yeah, we are providing irrigation. That is part of the plan. So the lawn would be spray, and then all the other planting areas would be drip to reduce irrigation. But we think that's important to have irrigation to help it out with the maintenance for the site. And then the sedum roof will also likely have irrigation, but that's drought tolerant, so it doesn't need much.
We have talked about doing some kind of rainwater catchment, but one of the issues, and this goes back to just how wacky the plot of land is that we've struggled to find a place to put the underground tank.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's actually feasible, but it's another thing the Shakers would have liked, and that they did themselves. So another question from Peter Reed, who says, great presentation and exciting project. And I know Peter has been involved with other aspects of Shaker life over the years and landscaping. But he asks, and Mark, I don't know if you know this, but did the Shakers cultivate trees and plants for their furniture and baskets? And I know a little bit about it, but Mark, is that something that you looked into at all?
No, I don't, other than I know they utilized local hardwoods for a lot of their furniture.
Yeah, and somebody just asked me this earlier today, you know, what kind of woods they used in their furniture, and that's exactly right. They used what was native and came to hand. So that's why you see different woods prevalent in the different communities from, say, Maine to Kentucky. And I know too that you know, at Mount Lebanon, they cultivated willow trees, which they used for rug whips, and I think for medicinal purposes with the bark as well. So I'm not sure about the baskets. I know Jerry Grant is in the audience. If he wants to type a quick answer in there, I can read that, but we can come back to that. Hugh Glover asks, whether the Shakers would have considered a pollinator garden, or that was just sort of naturally occurring in their plantings.
Well, it probably was naturally occurring in their plantings. You did see beehives in some of their images, so they were cultivating that. And I don't, you know, the pollinators in today are much more under threat and than they were at that time. So I don't have an answer for that.
Mm-hmm. Kathleen Markhart says, so nice that you included cat mint. Tina Kepi says she loves the pollinator sections and asks whether there will be outdoor interpretive signage to teach visitors about the design and plant choices. And I don't know that we've gotten to that point of the discussion. Do you have thoughts about that, Mark?
Yeah, we haven't. You know, it could be something that could have some designations on the plants. Something like this is a little hard to interpret in the landscape. Hopefully, some of these, you know, we could develop some interpretive material that could be available that people could understand more and read about the landscape if they're interested, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Benji Sweat says wonderful design. He asks why ginkgos, and asks whether the Shakers would have used or had grown ginkgos.
They would not have, but it's a pretty sustainable tree, and it's a really hardy tree, and so I think because of some of those practical reasons, the Shakers may have been open to it. I don't think they certainly were not prone to only using natives. I mean, there's things that they're recommending, such as mugwort, which is the scourge of all of us right now, which is an invasive species. So they weren't exclusive to utilizing native or natural species.
Yeah, and I will say that, you know, as we were sort of working through the design and the building and the landscaping and how it would interact with the village, you know, we really were thinking, like, we wanted to have shade trees. We wanted to have some kind of shade there so that people could enjoy that little patch of lawn. But we also didn't want to obscure both the view from the windows within the museum, which is going to be, that'll be an exhibition space. So you'll be standing in an exhibition and you'll be able to see the shaker materials and then objects and then look back towards the village. And also we wanted, you know, we actually enlarged the existing windows in the front of the building so that you could do that. And then also from the village, you could look in and you can get a sense of what was happening. So, you know, there was a lot of sort of play about how do we provide these trees and some shade and some focal points without obscuring that back and forth between the village and the interior of the building.
Yeah, yeah, that form, that narrow form was something that was very important to the village, so that that they could see into the site. So yeah.
Anyway, Benji says he loves ginkgos and it's a great idea for Chatham. And I will say, because I know Benji, has long created very beautiful photographic portraits of trees. So he's very tuned to tree choices.
Okay.
Does anybody else have questions? I have one more question that I was going to ask, which is everybody, if you're thinking, if you've got other questions, you can type them in. But I was thinking about your work with Ilana, which is, you know, what, 20 miles away from this site. And it's very different. For those of you who don't know, it's the historic home of Frederick Edwin Church, who's a Hudson River painter. And he really drew a lot of his inspiration from his views that he had from that property. And it's, I mean, it couldn't be more different, really. But I wonder if you can talk about when you know, because one of them is, I mean, I don't really want to say Village of Chatham is urban, but it is an urban an urban setting versus this pastoral area with this, you know, where the concern was the view shed and how that changed over time. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how you, like, what's different or what's the same about how you approach those kinds of projects.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't explain the history of Ilana, but yes, it was Frederick Church was the designer, and he was the famed Hudson River School, and he designed this house and this landscape. And in this, you know, so that's something that he's designed on that piece of property, it's related to his vision, and it has a high degree of historical integrity, meaning that not much has changed on the site. There's some, you know, ingrowth and some changes in the land use, but really it was about, you know, preserving a lot of that, but restoring that to the original land use, and also those views. The views out from Ilana have been preserved, and this is something that is called the Ilana Vue Shed, that they've been able to preserve these views from being disturbed from power plants and power lines and other things. So in that sense, and for Ilana, it's more of a preservation, a rehabilitation, and kind of bringing out what he had designed. But it's also, you know, adapting that site. Now it's a state historic site, so it was a personal, private residence that, you know, used by a few, and now it's open to the public, so it's accessed by thousands. So you have to carefully blend that historical aspects with the new interventions, and so that it's understood what's old, what's new. And so it is very different from this site, which doesn't have that level of historical integrity that's present. And even though the site doesn't have any historical designation, it's not a historic site, there's not that much that we could draw from this existing site to reveal or portray. So that's why we really delved into the history and the culture of the Shakers, so that we could find those stories, find those elements, to tell their story on this new site that's away from them to help to support that mission of the museum. So I hope that answers some of that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We have another question from Elizabeth Albert. She asks about the choice of the grasses and whether you're aware of any sort of utility for the grasses in terms of like making things from them, like baskets or anything like that.
That's a great idea. I didn't think of that. I think the grasses that we've selected are probably too fine in their blades. That's be an interesting to see if they had grasses that they would have used.
Okay, well, we're getting close to 8 o'clock. Any last questions here? I'm going to assume no. But I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's great to be, we can't see you. It's great to have you here. I know you're all here. And Mark, this has been fascinating, and I can't thank you enough, both for volunteering your time tonight to speak to us and also for being such a great partner on this project. Thank you so much.
We're so happy to be involved. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.